computer. Okay, so as I said, this should now be recording. Also, just if you were not aware, I'm asking everybody to sign their name into chat. Everything that you put in chat will be part of that recording. Just so you are aware, what you're typing will get recorded. All right, so welcome. As I've mentioned to most of you, if not all of you at this point, you are probably all more experienced with this than I am at this point, since you've had other classes today. I'll do my best to get through, and just please feel free to chime in if there is a problem. I will ask everybody to stay on mute unless you need to ask a question. Or if you have another concern. Another thing, I don't know if you've done in your other classes today, is trying to raise your hand. If you go to the toolbar, for many of you it'll be on the bottom, and that's what will show up where you found the chat. You should see a participants box. If you click on that, you should see a listing, and you should be able to click on a hand. Do you see that? Okay, if everybody could just click on their hand to raise their hand and then unclick. Okay, that looks great, thank you. And once you've clicked on the blue hand, go ahead and unclick it. That's how you would let me know that your question is answered. Okay, everybody good on raising your hand? I didn't keep track if everybody, they all popped up at once, so I didn't keep track if everybody did it. Okay. If you haven't already done so, I'll ask everybody to mute all of your phones. Actually, it's something I did not do, excuse me. All right, there we go. In case of any technological problems, if I go offline, obviously I'll do my best to get online. Try the link every minute or so. We'll give it 10 minutes. If I can't get it working in 10 minutes, we'll have to call it quits. And I will communicate with you via email in that event. Okay, so other than that, how's everybody doing in these exciting times? Unmute and chime in.
Great.
Or not? You're hanging in?
This is great. I'm in pajamas.
Great.
Pajamas are nice.
No commute.
And no commute. And no parking either, although I can tell you parking at the school is really easy these days. That was a joke. Okay. All right, thank you for that, that laugh. Okay, so a little bit of class housekeeping now. We will get started how we often do. I think a few people were confused regarding the change of the assignment due date, given everything that's going on. Assignment 3 is due on Thursday, end of the day. As mentioned, I do realize that part of it involved you coming to the library and using the books, which of course now is not advised. So please submit your assignment without that question, which is question 2 of part A. And then once everything gets back to normal, we'll talk about how you can submit the rest of the assignment. Probably I will just have you resubmit the assignment with that answer. But we can, if you can think of a better way, I'm open to suggestions. Given this staggered approach to this particular assignment, I will have to ask you to bear with me. It will take a little bit longer to do the grading. But again, I'll just keep you informed once we get back to normal and we know when that is. Again, we will have class again through Zoom next week. I have decided rather than go through the standard law school link, which the law school is creating, I'm just going to create our own Zoom link, and I will send that to you probably Monday. And this, as I mentioned, this session is being recorded. I am hoping to upload that recording to YouTube the way I usually do for our In the Building class sessions. Okay, that's it for me in terms of what I have for housekeeping. Any questions? I will do my best to check the list of you for your blue hands, but I may get focused and miss that. So if I'm not answering your question, noticing your question, just unmute and ask it. But give me a minute or so to recognize that. Okay. All right then. Welcome, Menashe and Chrissy. I still don't see you, but I can see your microphones are on mute, so I'm going to hope that you are here. Please add into chat, pull up the chat and just say hi to let me know. And hopefully Taylor and Jenny will join us shortly. Okay. So thank you to those of you who were able to look at the Lexis Learn modules before class. I know that since it was rather a last minute request, not everybody was able to do that. So for those of you who were not able to do it, we'll leave time at the end of the session, and those of you who completed it, you'll get to sign off a little bit early. So what I'm going to try to do is do a little bit of review of what was in that session for everybody who didn't see it, and for those of you who have, it'll be a review of what you saw. But we're going to start off essentially just talking about citators. We're going to look at we've already looked at citators for statutes, but we're now going to look at citators for cases. And just to step back a little, defining what a citator is, I'm pulling up Google Scholar. You may remember Google Scholar has a cases component, so I pulled up this particular case you can see on the screen, Rush Prudential, and I'm bringing up Google Scholar to show you it has a citator, but it's not going to be nearly as sophisticated as the ones we'll look at on Lexis, Westlaw, and Bloomberg. But what Google Citator does is kind of tell us what a citator is, which basically just tells us how our particular document was cited. Google Citator isn't specific about what type of document is citing it or how it's citing it. It's just saying how our document was cited in other documents. And that's essentially what a citator is. And we saw that, as I mentioned, here on Westlaw. We were looking at a statute. So here we see a statute in the General Business Law, Section 349. This should be very familiar to you all from your assignment. And we talked quite a bit about what these yellow flags mean. And in fact, this is a good opportunity for me to review a little bit of the statutes assignment that I sent back to you. Some of you looking at a statute section thought that the proposed legislation was important in terms of whether or not this statute is still controlling law. The proposed legislation is really just that, and they really shouldn't put a yellow flag. The proposed legislation is really just what it sounds like. The legislature has said, hey, maybe we'll change this section. It really does not affect whether or not this law is applicable to you and your client in whatever particular jurisdiction. What you do need to focus more on is when you see the flag or the symbol, as we'll see on Lexis in a moment, and it's giving you a case citation with some sort of treatment. And as we talked about last time, be very careful. Don't assume, especially if it's a red flag, that that means that this statute is no longer good law. Essentially, all this is telling us is that this particular case limited the application of this particular section. And if you went to read this case, which I did, you would find out that this particular case limited this section only with regard to the National Flood Insurance Statute. So there is a National Flood Insurance Statute that preempts the application of Section 349 only in flood insurance situations. So that's essentially what the citator does in statutes by way of review. So let's now take a look at cases, and the same application applies with regard to how you interpret that particular, getting to our case, so how you interpret the particular signal. So let's take a look at Lexis first with Shepard's, the original citator. And Lexis is pretty good about letting us know what all of this means and what you hopefully have learned or will learn in Module 6 is how to use Shepard's in order to first determine whether or not your case is still controlling for the holding that you are relying on it for. And that's a really, really important point. And that's the point that the module makes so well, which is one of the reasons I've asked you to look at it, is again, just like Section 349 on Westlaw is still perfectly valid, even though there was a yellow flag there. It's very possible that this case, Clay versus United Health Group, is still quite valid. We would need to take a look at these cases for which there are caution, or if it's a red flag, it might be warning, and take a look at those cases. So I'm clicking on caution now and hoping Lexis will bring us there, and taking a look at these cases to see how it is they cited to Clay, why they cited to Clay. Actually, I'm going to go back a moment. One of the really nice features about Shepard's is what Shepard's does is it tells you right here, reason for Shepard's signal. So why is it giving it a caution signal? And basically, if you click on that reason for signal, Shepard's let you know that it was criticized by Kellogg v. Brown, and here's the part of this Kellogg decision that criticized Clay. So of course you want to take a look and see if that has to do with the point of law you're interested in. You also want to look at the court to determine whether or not this is invalidating the holding you're relying on in your case, or it's a lower court and it's just criticizing it and has no authoritative power. So that's the reason for signal. And again, what I'll do now is Shepardize the document. I had just clicked on caution. So if, actually this is what the module will do. So some of you have done this already. You can take a look at just those cases that negatively interpreted, and what you can do is use, now that I've narrowed it by analysis to caution, I can search within results for the language that I'm interested in. So that's a really powerful way to determine whether or not you can rely on a particular case. Another way to do that, as I mentioned, let's go back here. Again, back here in the Clay case, I can just Shepardize the document so I see all of the different treatments. And either way is fine. And then if I wanted to, I could narrow by all of the cases that cautioned. I could choose any of these particular options. And again, use the search in results. Scrolling down to wherever that is, search within results here to further hone in for a group of cases with a particular analysis. Make sense so far? Any questions? I'm looking for any blue hands. Okay. So that idea of making sure a case is good law, that's really not the best terminology, because it makes you think that, oh, this case either is or isn't good law. And that is frequently not the case. A case can be perfectly fine for holdings 1, 2, and 3, but may or may not be criticized or reversed or overruled for holding number 4. And so this is why you want to use these tools to narrow in and look at cases that somehow negatively treat your case to see for which holding. Okay. So another neat way to use Shepard's to do this is this little pie chart, which is what they call the grid view. So if I wanted to see how, if I know Clay was in the 11th Circuit, but I wanted to see how the Second Circuit treated Clay. Say, for instance, I want to rely on Clay, or I want to argue Clay is no good. I can go to this grid view and see immediately, well, actually, the Second Circuit really hasn't said much about anything about Clay. I just cited it. But if we were in the Fifth Circuit, here's a case. So again, it depends on your jurisdiction. You always need to be thinking about, as I like to say, your time-space continuum, where you are. Okay. Another thing we can do back in the regular view, you can do this as well. Again, you can sort, as I've mentioned, by analysis. You can do the search within results. You can also sort to your particular circuit or jurisdiction. We can obviously sort to states as well as federal courts using the filters here. Any questions? Okay, you're all kind of quiet. I don't know if this is the online aspect of this. Okay. I'm going to move over to Westlaw now. So here is the same Clay case on Westlaw. And we've already noted the flags on Westlaw. The way to make this same analysis on Westlaw is you might want to take a look at negative treatment. So Westlaw divides it up by tab here. And Westlaw provides us what it determines is the most negative case. Another feature on Westlaw is it tells us how much depth that particular case discusses Clay. So for more research purposes, that might be useful. And I'm going to back up a moment. So I'm talking mostly right now about using citators to make sure whatever case you are relying on can still be relied on for that holding. Citators are also incredibly useful for research purposes, and I've touched on that a little bit here with the depth of treatment. On Westlaw, we saw that with that grid where you could find how a different circuit treats a particular case. So that would be one way to find, to do additional research for a particular point of law. We see here also the different negative treatments. We see the headnotes that this case, Jimmy Johns, is citing Clay for. So if we were to look at Clay at headnote number 1, that would be federal courts in general, as you can see, and that's one of the points of law Jimmy Johns is citing the Clay case for. The nice thing is you can highlight the headnotes. You don't have to remember what headnote number is what in Clay. Any questions? Another neat feature that I find less so for validating and researching purposes, but more for understanding a particular case and its procedural history, is this history tab. And actually, I'm going to move to a different case to show you that for a moment, only because it shows us something a little bit more interesting. So we're looking at the Rush Prudential case here, and this history tab is a little bit more interesting. Oh, is that a question? I heard a beep. Okay. Back then here on the history tab. So what it does is it gives us a little chart, a little graph of how the Rush Prudential case went through the courts. I wish I had this when I was taking civil procedure, because I could never figure out how the case went up and down in the courts, and being able to look at it this way, to me, makes it make a whole lot more sense. you find it useful for other purposes, of course, that's great too. So back here, moving to so we've looked at negative treatment, again, to see whether or not we can rely on a particular case's holding. Moving to citing references. So one of the tricks for using citing references is remembering, if you want to get into any searching detail, you can search within results for any of the citing references, but note here on the side, we've got all different types of content types. Usually when we're looking at citing references for cases, we're interested in cases. We may want to see what secondary sources cite to a particular case, if that case is really crucial for our particular issue. But you want to remember to go to the content type, because that gives you more searching capabilities, or really filtering capabilities. And there are a whole lot of them, so it takes an extra minute to load. And we notice again here the different treatments. And as we scroll down, again, we can do the search within results, but here's where we can do that narrowing by jurisdiction, as we saw the filters on Lexis. So again, if we wanted to search and find a case in the Second Circuit, this is where we could do that, or in New York, or whatever state that you are in. So this, again, brings us more into the research aspect of a citator, again, helping us find additional authority for a particular point of law. Another way we can do that, which is kind of neat, going back here to the case itself. Some of you may have noticed as we looked at headnotes, and I'm just scrolling through, now I'm at the Rush Prudential case, I'm just scrolling through. And you may have noticed in our headnotes, we have this link, cases that cite this headnote. So if this headnote really, really describes perfectly, or even just really well, doesn't have to be perfect, really well, our particular issue, I can just click on this link and find 32 cases that cite to this particular headnote of this case, not just this case about some other issue that I don't care about, but this case having to do with the headnote that I am most interested in. So that, again, is a pretty powerful research tool, again, once you have found a relevant case. Any questions about, oh, is that a hand, Andrea, or a stretch? That's a stretch. Okay, stretches are good. By all means, stretch away. Okay. Oh, Marlon, I see your hand. So unmute and ask your question.
Yeah, I typed it. Which citator do you prefer and why?
So first, let me go back. I won't be able to check the chat. So if you do have a question, please use the hand, which you figured out. So thank you for that. Which particular citator do I prefer and why? I think they are both really good. They can be pretty different. I'll be honest with you, although I really don't want to suggest that one is better, because it isn't. I kind of like Shepard's a little bit better. It just makes more sense to me, but Westlaw is just as good. They are actually they can be different. So for instance, we are looking at Rush Prudential here, and notice it's got a yellow flag, and back when we were looking at negative treatment, we saw it was most negative. And it's pulling it up again because there's so many. So we learned that this particular case recognized an overruling, and another case that recognized an overruling, actually that's the Clay case. If we go to Lexis and we look at Rush Prudential, notice it's got a different level of warning. It's got the red stop sign, which is like 2 above the yellow caution sign that, or the yellow flag that Westlaw has. Some people like Westlaw because it's simpler. It's just got a couple of flags on Shepherds, you have all these different symbols here. Now they tell you what the symbol is, and usually even if it doesn't say right next to it, if you hover over it, it'll tell you what the symbol means. So I thought that's pretty interesting that sometimes Shepherds and Keysight will give you slightly different results. And also the interesting thing is, if you go to view the top citing reference, the reason for the Shepherd signal, and scroll down, it's actually a different case. So here's the case overruled in part by. So here's actually the case, at least according to Shepherds, that actually overruled Rush Prudential as opposed to recognizing the overruling by a different case. So I purposely didn't answer that very directly, or as I said, I probably have a slight preference for Shepherds, but that's not to say that if I were working somewhere that only had Westlaw, I would be very unhappy. I wouldn't. I would learn how to utilize Keysight. Other questions? Okay. While we're here in Lexis, just to show you the equivalent, we saw cases that cite this head note on Westlaw. We can shepherdize or narrow by this head note on Lexis, and it's kind of the same thing. So both features are there. Okay, a couple of other neat features. You can set up alerts if you're following a case. Pretty sure that's under, nope, that's not under actions. Be honest with you, I don't remember exactly where Lexis put it these days, but there is the ability to set up a Shepherd's alert on Lexis. On Westlaw, there's this little bell here. I'm sure on Shepherd's somewhere there's a bell. But anyway, it's there somewhere. Maybe you have to get into Shepherd's to do it. I won't spend too much time. Oh, there it is. Yeah, so once you get into Shepherd's, you can create an alert. Okay, let's go to Bloomberg, because believe it or not, I know from your assignments that many of you are not huge Bloomberg fans, and I can understand why. But Bloomberg does have a citator. Not surprisingly, it's called bcite. So over here, you can see it open up this extra tab. We're again at that Rush Prudential case. And the either advantage or disadvantage, depending on your viewpoint, is bcite makes it pretty straightforward. Positive, distinguish, negative. You can go straight to that particular treatment on bcite, or you can look at all of them case analysis. Actually, truth be told, you are looking at all of them by clicking on negative. I just basically told Bloomberg to check off these check boxes, or check on, I should say, right, Maggie? Check on these check boxes. And here, Bloomberg is giving its analysis. So prior overruling in quoted. And again, you see the depth of treatment here. You can narrow by the court. And we see the tabs here. So one thing I didn't go over before we go any further is, and actually Bloomberg does it pretty well here, the difference between direct history and indirect history. The module, if you have, or when you get to view the Lexis Learn module, explains it pretty well. The direct history has to do with the litigation for this particular case. So the direct history will tell us what happened in the Rush Prudential case. How did it make it up to the Supreme Court? The analysis, or what's sometimes called the indirect history, will basically tell us all the unrelated cases after Rush Prudential that cited to Rush Prudential. I know that sometimes confuses people. Again, I think as you view the module, that will help clarify it as well. And here back on Bloomberg, the table of authorities is what it sounds like. It tells us what cases Rush Prudential cited. And that can be useful because if Rush Prudential relied on a particular case that subsequently got overruled, that might actually affect Rush Prudential's authority. Not that it has much anymore because it's been overruled, but for other cases that do. And here on Bloomberg, the citing documents are just what that sounds like. documents, other documents that have types of documents that have cited to Rush credentials. So you can see here the different types of documents. Any questions on Bloomberg? Okay. So we looked briefly at Fastcase last time. Fastcase, I find personally is not as intuitive as Lexis or Westlaw, but the main reason and advantage to Fastcase is it's far less expensive. And as I also mentioned last time, if you belong to the New York Bar Association or other states' bar associations, I don't have a list of them all, but many of the states actually have the same arrangement as New York, and that is if you're a member of the Voluntary Bar Association, you can access Fastcase as part of your membership. So depending on where you're practicing, that might be really useful. Fastcase, in addition to giving us a research platform for statutes cases that we've talked about, Fastcase also has its own citator, and it's called the LawBot, as you can see here. So Fastcase will give you a heads up that you want to view the authority check, and if it doesn't automatically come up, you would click on that, and you can see here again from the Rush Prudential site, we're getting a warning from our LawBot here that there's some serious negative treatment. And interestingly, Fastcase identifies yet a different case with that regard, and you get the little bubble grid here letting you know how many times the cases have been cited. These are the cases cited by Rush Prudential. Here's the line is where Rush Prudential is, and cases that have cited Rush Prudential. So again, if you find yourself in a situation where you don't have access to either Lexis or Westlaw, you may be able to access Fastcase through the Bar Association. Okay, any questions on citators? So for the remainder of today, I'm going to review what I call court and case resources. I'm going to start with case resources. We've been looking, of course, at the main ones that you're used to using, Lexis, Westlaw, and to a lesser extent, Bloomberg, and now Fastcase. But there are actually a lot of resources out there that allow you to read opinions for free. Of course, we already know one. There's Google Scholar. And again, you have to remember to go to Google Scholar and then use the case law radio button, and you can choose your jurisdiction. Except the one thing you'll notice, and maybe you know a better way, but I do not, and that is we don't know how far back Google Scholar goes. I don't know that Google Scholar could answer how far back Google Scholar goes. You can kind of guess by looking at the range and seeing if you can guess how far back it goes, but who needs to spend all that time guessing, right? So Google Scholar is great if you have a relatively recent case and you just want to read the opinion. Google Scholar is also great if you just want to do a quick and easy research before diving into the more expensive ones. But don't rely on Google Scholar to cover every case that is out there. We just don't know what Google Scholar covers. There are other interesting free sites. My guess is Google Scholar does not. Google Scholar is really good for the really current stuff because that's what Google's good at. But there's actually a site that's kind of good, and it's free, for the older stuff. And that site is called the Case Law Access Project. It's put together, as you can see, by Harvard Law. And basically what they're trying to do is make available court decisions, officially reported court decisions, so that it's freely available for anyone who's interested. And you can see we can scroll down here and click on the map. And you'll notice here some of those names, those nominative reporters I told you about last time. And they go way back to 1870, or here's one back to 1807. So here's a great resource for the really old stuff. I don't know if you did a search for a case name, a really old case name, whether Google is smart enough to search this site. So it's good to know about. And the link, by the way, for all these sites I have mentioned and will mention are on the course website in the cases module. Okay, so this is Case Law Access Project, a good site to know about for the old stuff. And then there are the two general legal portals that we've mentioned before, FindLaw and Legal Information Institute. They're both pretty good. I tend to go to Legal Information Institute first just because that's what I'm more familiar with. And yes, familiarity is not a good reason if I'm being asked an evaluate question, but it is a good answer to let you know why I'm going to tend to go here rather than FindLaw. Lots of people use FindLaw. You might want to notice if you just go to FindLaw, it's for the general public, and you might want to go directly to the professional site because that will give you more direct access to primary resources. Another place to go to find cases, and this is true especially for very recent cases, in cases that may or may not be reported. Remember, we talked about that last time. The different officially reported cases are what are going to be primary authority in that particular jurisdiction. Unreported cases may or may not be authority and may or may not be even persuasive. So to find those cases, go to the court website. Each state is going to have its version of its main court's website. So here is New York's, and you'll see the link to decisions right here, which looks like this. So you can go to the particular appellate, the particular courts here. You can also view the official reports. So this is where you would go, and you probably would get this link either through one of the portals, Legal Information Institute Fast Case, as well as Googling might bring you here as well. So this site divides up again by those official reports, so those officially reported cases we've talked about. But notice here that slip opinion. Remember, I showed you the picture of that piece of paper that was a slip. So that terminology is still used online, even though it's not paper anymore, it's online. So that slip opinion service will show you unreported cases. I'll go to that quickly. You can actually see decisions on motions, as well as filings here. So again, every state will have its own particular version of this. It will not be organized like this. Every state will do it differently. You can Google or try to navigate through the site here to get to a particular court. So if I just wanted to look at the Nassau County District Court, I could try to Google it, or as you can see, I've navigated to it here and then see where it might tell me about its decisions. So I don't even know if this particular site gives us decisions, but district court decisions, there it is. So here is another source for that. And a particularly neat feature here in the New York court site, so here back on the decision site, there's actually a citation services, which looks like this. So again, this is a citator. This isn't going to tell us how the case was treated, so it's not nearly as sophisticated as Lexis Westlaw or Bloomberg. It's more like Google in that it will just tell us how a particular case has been cited. So if I plug in a site here, it gives me an error. Gotta love that. This is why I like to put up tabs. Let's see if we'll try this one more time, but we won't go crazy over it. So back here, we'll go to citation services. We'll go to the New York official report citator, and maybe it will like me better that I've gone the proper way. There we go. So here's this particular case. And here are the different cases that have cited to Bansbach v. Zinn. So again, a classic citator. Any questions? Okay. So one thing you may have noticed in cases on Lexis and Westlaw is that it will give you filings. So these are the briefs filed in the case itself, and possibly other filings. Lexis and Westlaw, I find, are pretty hit or miss when it comes to searching for filings in a particular case. Sometimes I get asked to find filings on a fairly regular basis. You might want to see a brief in a particular case because maybe that case was similar to yours and you want to see how they argued. You may just want to see a filing because it was cited to and you want to see that particular document that was cited. By far, the best place to go for docket information is Bloomberg. And you haven't heard me say that before, right? That the best place is Bloomberg, but here now, for dockets, Bloomberg is definitely the best. You, I know, won't necessarily have access to Bloomberg. The reason Bloomberg is the best, I should mention, is that it basically pulls in all of the information from Pacer. I know one of you asked me about Pacer a while back, but Pacer is basically the federal court system for filing documents in federal cases. And Pacer, you can actually search the actual Pacer database, but Pacer was developed in the 1990s and the interface hasn't been updated since the 1990s, so it is incredibly clunky. So what Bloomberg does is has done is it's imported all the information from Pacer and given it the Bloomberg platform, so it's much easier to use. So here on the home page, you see the docket search. So what I suggest is narrowing to your court. So if you're looking for the filings of a particular case, you know what court it is. So you could narrow to the court. So if we were interested in the Ninth Circuit, we could narrow to the different courts of appeals. We could narrow to the Ninth Circuit, again, whatever your particular. And then what I suggest you do is put in a party name. You may have the docket number. I rarely succeed in pulling up a case with a docket number because the formatting has to be perfect, exactly what Bloomberg wants it to be, and I can't guess what Bloomberg wants very well. But I do know how to type in a party name, so that usually I'm far more successful. So obviously do what works for you. That's just my experience. So I am pulling up a case about Led Zeppelin. And let's see if Bloomberg will give me the results. Bloomberg is not giving me the results here. Type parties. So I have pulled it up here. I'm not quite sure why the results aren't coming up. That's unfortunate. So did it take, oh, it didn't take my court selection. All right, we won't spend too much time on this. I'll try it one more time. So I'm not quite sure what I'm doing wrong here. It worked before. And I actually had it pulled up and searched it. That's clear all. Did want to show you what a docket looks like, which is why I'm going to struggle just a little bit longer. And if it doesn't work, then we will give up. So there's not an apply. See the fact that it's doing that. Even made sure I knew how to spell Led Zeppelin. All right, it's not my day for Bloomberg. What I will try to do is during the break, I'll pull this up so I can show you what a docket looks like. And I'll also tell you what I did wrong, so you know how to do this in future. Another source for docket information is called Recap. This is actually free. And for those of you who are super duper quick and perceptive, you'll notice that Recap is Pacer spelled backwards. And what Recap does is it's trying to make this docket information available to the public for free. So you can search for a particular case. So let's try again with Led Zeppelin. And let's use it. Let me clear all and then go to the Ninth Circuit. And let's see if I have any more success here. There we go. So basically, Recap has managed to get some of the documents in the Led Zeppelin case. So here you can see what a docket kind of looks like. It's basically, as I said, the filings of a case. It's a little bit clearer on Bloomberg, so as I said, we'll try to take a look at that after the break. So in addition to dockets, other types of court opinion and court resources are the availability of oral arguments, both audio as well as transcripts. The most famous site for that is the Oyez site for the Supreme Court. You can actually listen to the transcripts of Supreme Court cases, just navigating through either the cases link. And it goes back to some famous cases. So if you wanted to hear the oral argument, again, the audio of the oral argument for Roe versus Wade, which obviously goes back quite a ways in time, you could do that on the Oyez site. So if there are any historians in the group, that might be of interest. You can also find some transcript and oral argument information at other courts' websites. So for instance, at the New York, the highest court, the Court of Appeals, you see here, here's the oral arguments webcast, as well as the archive and transcripts. So if for whatever reason you wanted to hear an argument, you wanted to read the transcript, this would be one place. Either the court website would be one place to look, or for the Supreme Court, the Oyez site would be the place to look. Any questions? We're all very quiet. Are you still with me? Raise a hand if you. Okay, Andrea, I see a hand.
Hi. I just had a quick question about Bloomberg. So how up to date is it with Pacer? Because I know Pacer charges you per document, and I'm assuming it's free on Bloomberg. So how up to date is Bloomberg with what's on Pacer?
So the cool thing about Bloomberg, which again, I'll have to show you after break when I figure out what I'm doing wrong, is you can actually tell Bloomberg to update it. It can be as up to date as either yesterday or today. So what Bloomberg has, as I mentioned, is everything that's on Pacer that's available. There are some court files that are sealed for a variety of reasons. So you won't be able to get those documents, but you wouldn't get those on Pacer either. The other neat thing about Bloomberg is that it also has some state court filings. It's not as complete as it is for federal because Pacer is very complete, but I have found some New York and other state court filings on Bloomberg. So the short answer is very up to date, and that's the longer answer.
Okay, thank you.
You are quite welcome. Other questions? Everybody still doing okay? Okay, good. So another type of court resource are court rules. And I always debate with myself each semester, do I put court rules when we talk about cases, or do I put court rules when we talk about statutes, or do I put court rules when we will talk about administrative materials? Because it kind of fits in all three. So what are court rules? Essentially, they are a couple of different types of authority, and they are authority. I'm going to pull up our cases walkthrough. This is one of the neat features of doing this online, is I can pull this up and you can all actually see it on the screen. So remember, we looked at this chart of what's primary authority, and we looked at mandatory primary authority, and here, of course, Constitution and statutes, case law, and check this out, court rules. So court rules are mandatory authority, again, for the jurisdiction in which they apply. So as I mentioned, there are a couple of different types of court rules. Actually, this doesn't show that quite yet. So there are procedure codes. So here in New York, we have the CPLR, the Procedure Law and Rules. That's in our statutes. Those are basically statutes that are passed by the New York legislature, signed by the governor for how courts should proceed, or how cases should proceed in courts. And they tend to be more broad-based in nature. By broad-based, I mean they may establish the statutes of limitations. They may establish some substantive rights for litigants in the various New York courts. Think about your Civ Pro class, where you talked about the federal rules of civil procedure for most of the semester, right? You talked a lot about the different rules of the FRCP that had an effect on how people could bring cases, whether they could bring cases, and a lot of times people could not because of not following the FRCP. So those are examples of procedural-based rules. Now, the FRCP aren't passed by Congress, but what Congress did actually is delegate its authority to make the rules for the courts to the judges of the federal courts. So the FRCP are actually developed by the judges, but through the authority granted to them by Congress. So that's why it makes it sort of administrative, but don't worry about that right now. We'll be talking about administrative law next week. So that's the procedural type of court rules. Then there are the sort of day-to-day operational administrative type of court rules. What are the margins acceptable in a brief? How long can a brief be? Do they have particular font rules? I think some courts do. So these are a little more detailed and have less involved or less direct effect on the litigant's rights. But remember, these are mandatory authority, so you need to know about these court rules. So what I have here in this other tab is the handout I would have given you in paper, and if any of you would still like it in paper, let me know. You can email me. This is available on the course website in the handouts portion of the cases module, and it basically is a summary of how you find out information about the different types of court rules. I'm going to scroll through really quickly. So here we have just some general information, general links on the federal rules, how to get to them on Lexis, Westlaw, and Bloomberg, as well as New York. And I tried to make this as clear as possible. This is newyorkcourts.gov. That's actually the site we were just looking at. So I'm going to go back there now and go back. So this is that nycourts.gov site, and you'll see rules are right here. So you can see the different levels of New York state rules that are not the CPLR, but are established by the judges. So back to our handout here. And then this handout gets very detailed. I am not expecting anybody to remember all or even much of this. This is just for your reference, should it be of interest to you, especially those of you who plan on being litigators, might be worth knowing. The other reason this might be of use is here at the end of each type of court rule, or in this case, code of rules, I give you a listing of where to get more information, so leading treatises. So here we see the federal rules on the left of the table and New York rules on the right. So we see civil procedure, criminal procedure, and these are other procedural rules for the different federal courts, as well as the different types of courts in New York, surrogates court. Evidentiary rules, so federal rules of evidence. For those of you who've taken evidence, you spent a lot of time with that. Interestingly, New York does not have a codified law of evidence, so they rely more on the federal rules. I couldn't tell you about other states. Sentencing rules, for those of you interested in criminal law, obviously are going to be very important. And here, instead of the procedural rules, here are the more judicial day-to-day operational rules. So you can find those in you can find them in our annotated codes. So in the US Code for Federal Rules, you can find it in Title 28. You can track them down in McKinney's. McKinney's actually gives a separate pamphlet if you're looking. Again, this is in print. I realize most of you won't be looking at this in print. Here are some links. Okay, so that's a quick on what the rules are and how to find them if you decide, hey, I need to find rules. Another way you're likely to encounter rules is as you are doing research. So say I need to find out about frivolous suits. So you can see here, I did a search on Westlaw for frivolous suit. I narrowed my jurisdiction to New York and the US Supreme Court because I always want to know what's going on in the Supreme Court. And here's where I had to have some extra understanding of court rules, which is why I say I'm never quite sure what segment to put court rules in. Because in order to find court rules on Lexis and Westlaw, you have to know to look at statutes. Here, at least on Westlaw, it says statutes and court rules. So that's kind of obvious, I hope. And then in your results, you see, so here's a statute or a code section, which is also a statute. He's the New York CPLR. Again, remember the CPLR is our procedural rules. And here you actually see a different type of federal rule of, I guess that's appellate procedure. So in your results, you will see the rules interspersed. So once again, this brings back our theme of bibliographic awareness. As scrolling through, if you just are looking at your terms and think, oh, look, and you go to this particular, oh, look, this is exactly what I needed. You click on it and you don't really realize it's an appellate rule. You could be citing this in a way that doesn't apply if you're not in appellate court. Any questions? Okay. Likewise on Lexis. So I've done the same search here. I've limited to New York. I didn't add the Supreme Court, but I probably should have. Actually, I wouldn't need to because ultimately for rules, we want to go, remember, to statutes. Here on Lexis, it's not quite as obvious. You have to know to go to statutes and legislation. And then on Lexis, I can narrow, if I'm patient enough, and I can just look at court rules if I want to. I could just look at codes, which is most of the time why I'd be going to statutes and legislation. But here you can see how Lexis has pulled up. It's mostly getting federal rules. If I wanted to limit to New York, obviously I limit by jurisdiction. Maybe I want to get rid of, let's get rid of federal and see what we find in New York. So here you see the New York rules. And on Bloomberg, a little bit different. Bloomberg for these court types of material, you want to go here to this Litigation Intelligence Center. I found that on the browse menu and I just chose the Litigation Intelligence Center, obviously. And then here we see we can do our docket search here as well. Here's that, we find that points of law we talked about last week. And if we go scroll all the way down to litigation resources, and again, you just have to know this, then you could find court rules. You would also find court rules in your search results and filtering as we did with Lexis and Westlaw. Any questions about court rules or anything else we've talked about so far? Again, we're all on the quiet side here, but that's okay. Alrighty then, why don't we take a break? It's 5:10 or so. Let's come back at 5:20, stretch legs, get something to drink, whatever it is you like to do. I will remain online, so feel free to chime in if you have any questions. I'll be figuring out my Bloomberg problem, so I can show you that after break. Okay. What do I have here that I am doing wrong?
Professor Spar.
Yes.
It's Emily.
Hi, Emily.
I have a research assignment that I have to do at work, and I'm having a hard time with it. Should I email you or ask you after class or something? Would that be all right?
Yeah, that would be totally fine. We'll probably have time after class, or you can email.
Perfect. Okay, thank you.
Okay, that's interesting. Now it works. Okay. Excuse me, all folks. I'm gonna stretch also. And we'll wait another couple of seconds here. It's the other thing, if I see you, I know you're back rather than seeing your name. Say the one thing about doing this online, I have come to very much appreciate having two screens. But again, if it seems like I'm not looking at you, it's because I'm looking at the screen with your video rather than my camera. All right, then, let's resume. The recording has already started. So I did figure out what was going on, and for whatever reason, I was entering it correctly, but for whatever reason, Bloomberg was not taking my court choice. So let's see if it'll do it now. If it doesn't do it this way, you can also do a search up here, which probably is easier. But sometimes it's more accurate or precise to go. So there, so I didn't see that before. Now it should work. Keep your fingers crossed for me. There we go. So here are the results of various cases with Led Zeppelin in the Ninth Circuit. I am going to choose this one. And again, this is the docket search. These are would be what you would find on Pacer, but this is a whole lot easier to use, as I mentioned. So Andrew, I think you asked about how up to date. So current as of March 10th. This morning, so I don't know if you're that particular. Kind of a cool feature that I use now and again is those of us here on law school accounts can use this update docket feature, and this collection fee is waived for us. So if I were to accept that, why not? I don't think there'll be much change since 3 a.m. this morning, but anyway, sometimes that date isn't today. It could be a year or so ago. Not surprisingly, it's unchanged, as we've just learned. So that's a really useful feature on Bloomberg as well. I don't know if that exists on Pacer. Honestly, I don't use Pacer anymore because Bloomberg is so much better. And again, for us, since we already subscribe to Bloomberg, it's also free, which Pacer is not. As Andrea, thank you for mentioning that. Pacer, you pay when you basically download a document by the page. It's not a huge amount of money. I think it's 5 cents a page, but why go through that bother if you don't have to? We have Bloomberg available. So here you can see what a docket looks like. It's basically just what is going on in the case. So you see the nature of the case and the parties and attorneys, And then you see the documents that are filed. So if you wanted to see the complaint, you can see the various case as it progresses, the appearances of the attorney, the filing of the complaints, the answers. To view the documents, you can you click on this link. A lot of these request links, Bloomberg will be able to get the document for you, not always. So just so you have a sense of what a docket looks like if you haven't seen one before. Okay, any questions about Bloomberg dockets now that we made it there? Okay, so now I'm going to jump back to our court and case resources list, and moving on from court rules, which, as I said, are kind of statutory and kind of administrative. I'm going to move to jury instructions, which are really more secondary. So jury instructions are what they sound like. Basically, if you are in litigation at some point, you will need to submit to the judge your request for your client's side jury instructions. Obviously, you want to cast those jury instructions in a way that would be favorable to your client, but of course your opposing counsel is going to do so for their client. How do you draft jury instructions? There are sets called pattern jury instructions that are designed for particular jurisdictions. You will find most of the pattern jury instructions on Westlaw. So if I type in New York jury instructions, now remember, people still get fooled by this. Remember, Westlaw is using artificial intelligence to guess what I want. So don't just automatically click on the first link that comes up. Eventually read through. Sometimes you have to scroll through to find what it is you want. So I want New York pattern jury instructions civil. I'm going to Westlaw for New York because these do not exist on Lexis. Westlaw publishes the print version of New York pattern jury instructions, so not surprisingly, they are exclusively available on Westlaw. So if I wanted to find jury instructions for that heated topic of attorney malpractice, make sure I've typed that correctly. I could also browse through the table of contents. You know how much I love the table of contents. But searching is good through, and sure enough, here's malpractice attorney. So let's take a look so you can see what jury instructions look like if you haven't done so before. And before I do that, notice again, I would look through and take a look at the table of contents either here or the links here to see if there were other topics of interest, but actually our search did pretty well in finding us malpractice and attorney. So you can see this is what you might imagine a judge might read to the jury at the end of a trial. As you've heard, the plaintiff claims that he or she retained the defendant and so forth. And then the judge goes on to explain what the elements are and what the jury should be looking for, talking about the various different aspects of attorney malpractice. So here's how you would find how to draft jury instructions, but the reason I refer to jury instructions as sort of secondary source is that as you get through the different text of what the judge might say, you get this comment. And here is where the authors of this set, after giving you the possible text of what the judge might say, gives you some background about attorney malpractice, about your whatever it is you searched. So it tells us the charge incorporates the principle that a plaintiff alleging must prove that. So, and you see here case citation. So this is like it's giving you explanation, it's giving you citation to primary sources. That's what secondary sources do. It gives you 3 essential elements. So this actually, on the issue of attorney malpractice, we know it's in New York. You could learn the basics of what the elements are. So this could be a really super useful introduction or even quick and dirty source for finding out what attorney malpractice is all about in New York. I actually have sat in a presentation with attorneys, actually folks not long, a few years out of law school, so not experts in their field quite yet, who talk about the first place they go is New York PJI. That's just its abbreviation here. New York PJI, to just sort of get a basis for their particular issue, even if they don't have to draft jury instructions. When you search secondary sources on Westlaw, New York pattern jury instructions might be one of the sources that you get. So a useful source to know about. Remember how I've always talked about New York jurisprudence as a good place to start your research for New York. New York pattern jury instructions might not be a bad place either, or maybe the next step after New York jur. So there are other states have jury instructions. So if I wanted to find Florida, I would put in Florida jury instructions, and it would work the same way for states. There are also federal jury instructions. So here on Westlaw, I think they have a separate, I didn't confirm this before class, so let's investigate and see if there is a separate jury. There is a separate jury instruction category. And you would also see jury instructions as a filter if you wanted to filter it after doing a search. Lexis also has jury instructions, but not New York. So if we did a search, let's just filter to New York to make our search a little quicker. Whoops. Look for attorney malpractice, our least favorite topic. And there you see jury instructions. Ah, silly me, I filtered for New York after telling you Lexis doesn't have New York. My mistake. Let's try Florida, Massachusetts, not New York. Illinois, anybody have a favorite state? All right, New Jersey. Let's see what we get. Keep your fingers crossed. There we go. So here you see the different states' jury instructions that Lexis does have. And I would imagine the same concept applies, that for these other states, these might be useful secondary sources as well. This one's a little briefer, so maybe this one isn't quite as informative as our New York PJI is. Jury instructions are also available on Bloomberg, in our litigation. Here are litigation resources. Thought they were. Yeah, you could find jury instructions here. It's probably even more limited than Lexis. One thing I will note, for New York, you will actually find criminal jury instructions available for free on the web, again at our newyorkcourts.gov site. Interestingly, the criminal jury instructions are available for free, but not even the basic format for civil. For civil, you have to go to the New York pattern jury instructions, which, as I said, are published by Westlaw's parent company. Questions on jury instructions? Useful secondary source, even if you don't necessarily need to instruct a jury. Okay. Another useful litigation resource, actually I'll steal Bloomberg's term instead of calling it court and cases resource, Another good litigation resource to know about are jury verdicts. Again, if you are in litigation, after you provide the instructions, obviously you have a verdict and you want to suggest to juries how much you may want to suggest how much damages. It's not a number you necessarily pick out of a hat. I suppose you could. There are resources that give you a sense of what other cases in different areas of the law, what kind of damages have been awarded. So that's the verdicts portion. So let's take a look here on Westlaw. Back to Westlaw again. I'll leave we'll limit to New York. We obviously don't need the Supreme Court for damages. And we can actually tell Westlaw. So since I've already limited to New York, and again, our least favorite topic, attorney malpractice. Really, just gonna copy that. And you can filter, if you decide you want to filter then by jurisdiction, you can actually filter by award range. So you just get a sense of how many different verdicts are in a particular range. So it looks like this 200,000 to $1 million are probably where the most are. You've got this outlier at 5 million. So I'm of course going to go for the crazy amount. So we can see this particular case. So there's, $7 million award. That's scary. And what their injury was, it talks about a surgeon. Oh, this is a medical malpractice case. I don't know why that came up, probably because the word attorney is in there. So there's an example of computers. Yep, computers not knowing what we think. This is a medical malpractice case, not an attorney malpractice case. But hopefully you get the idea of how you would look for jury verdicts, jury settlements. Here on Lexis, going back to our home page, Lexis does it a little bit differently. It's kind of neat in a way. So back up here in the grid, there are different parts of Lexis. We're in the research part of Lexis Advance. We usually start here. Our first page is the Lexis for Law Schools, what we see when we first log in. There is this part called Verdict and Settlement Analyzer. I have no idea how much extra this costs on Lexis. Same goes for Westlaw. Just because we have the New York portion of Westlaw may not mean that that includes this jury verdict information. So find that out before you start researching. Note here I'm already limited to New York. So for Lexis, I'm going to try something a little bit different, because since our attorney malpractice brought up different non-attorney related issues, we'll see even worse, or even a less favorite topic than attorney malpractice is legal malpractice with respect to research, because none of you have any excuse for that anymore that you've taken this class. I hate this silence. Anyway, so here you see these nice graphs for this particular topic. And just trying to have a little fun with the topic there. So you see the average award for plaintiff, all sorts of nice graphical information over time by resolution. Don't know why 2008 there were so many cases. And then you can see the cases themselves. So let's try this one. So again, we see just the information about the case, what the award was. defendant's counter case summary. And here's the award, only $5 million. So again, I was joking around about the topic, but again, the idea that if you are a litigator, at some point you will reach the end of a trial and will need to think about damages, or maybe think about damages depending on your area, and these resources are available. Again, bear in mind you want to find out whether they are in your contract or not, because I suspect if they are not, they are super expensive. Questions about jury verdicts? Okay, so this will be interesting. I have reached the end of the material that I wanted to cover today. I do want to do finish our topic and key number workshop. I'm not quite sure how I help you all do that online. So what you will have to do is chime in and ask me questions if you have. The other thing I thought I would try for those of you who haven't done the module, the Lexis Learn module, is to walk through at least the first one a little bit. Those of you who have done it, you're welcome to stay with us and hear our discussion, but you're not required to do that. You can go off on your own and finish the topic and key number workshop. So this is going to be a little free for all, I guess, and I will start.
When is the workshop due?
Okay, how about trying to get that finished and scanned to me before next week's class?
Okay, so there's a workshop due, and then assignment 3 due on this Thursday.
So assignment 3 is due this Thursday. Assignment 4 will be available in about a half an hour.
Mm-hmm. So assignment 4 and the workshop will be due on Tuesday?
No, okay, not assignment 4, good heavens. Assignment 4 will be due 2 weeks on the 24th.
Okay.
And we will see what happens with the situation as it is. I can extend that.
Okay, so if I did the two modules that were due before class, as of now, I can finish this workshop on my own time?
Yeah.
Okay, all right, well.
So before anybody goes though, just a couple of things about next week. As I mentioned, the assignment 4 on cases is now up, or will be available, as I said, in about half an hour. I will be sending out a link for next week's online class. The other thing I would like to do, you are all incredibly quiet. I understand this online context or format is new and different, but I want to get, next week's class is going to be the full class because we're going to start administrative materials. So I want to get a sense of how to make this as valuable for you as possible. So I'm going to ask you either to email me with suggestions, or if you'd rather do so anonymously, I will be sending out a survey that is anonymous, and I will ask you to be forthright in terms of any suggestions. So I can, as I said, I can make next week's class as productive as possible. Next week's class is on administrative materials, and it's really important stuff because it's again primary authority, and it's probably what you are least familiar with. Okay, so that's all I have to say about next week. If you want to hang out and walk through the module, hang out. If you want to hang out and work through the cases workshop, hang out. If you want to go off and do your thing, that's fine too.
This is the cases workshop, right?
That's correct.
Okay. And you want us to scan it in, or is there an online, a copy of this on the Lexis Classroom that we could fill it out typing instead of physically scanning? I don't think my print scans. Okay.
Absolutely. Great idea. Other questions? Okay, so what I'm going to do here for those hanging out for the module is I am going to
All right, Professor,
share
I'll
my,
see you next week. Sorry.
okay.
Bye.
I'm-
Take care.
Have a good week. For those of you who are cutting out, again, don't hesitate to contact me if you've got questions about assignments or anything else. And we'll see you next week online.
Okay, bye.
Thank you, Professor. See you next week.
Okay. So I'm going to see if any of you remain. What I'm doing now is setting up the Zoom for a video. You should all still see my screen. Do those of you still here see my screen? Okay. So I'm guessing, so how many of you still here have seen the module? Raise your, okay, you can raise your hands physically. Okay, not everybody. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to play the, I'm not going to play the hypothetical. Those of you who haven't done this yet, you'll need to go back and play the hypothetical and then do this, but by hanging out now, you'll get a head start on how it works. So, and I'm only going to do this for the first one. I am going to ask you to do the second one on your own. The second one is a lot easier. I think for those of you hanging out, anybody have any of you done the second one who's still here? Yeah, so is that easier? The second one? Kind of yes, sort of Okay, again, for those of you who do it, if you have questions, let me know. Let's take a look. So this happened to me before. Bear with me while I restart it. That's because it logged me out. All righty.
Professor Sparks, since
Yeah.
I did the modules, I'm just going to email you my question about work. Is that all right?
Sure.
Okay, perfect. Thank you. Have a good night.
Thanks, you too. Okay.
Throughout this module, questions will surface, giving you the chance to review the information covered. Use the legal research system below the video player to locate the answers. After you've found the case law and code sections to support your conclusions, you need to make sure that the authority you're relying on has not been reversed or overruled. To properly validate the cases and code sections you find, you'll need to use a citator. With case law, citators show you the history of a case and help you to evaluate the strength of its holdings.
Okay, so we talked about this. Citators are used to check the validity of cases, statutes, and regulations. True or false? Raise your hands if you think it's true.
True.
Okay, anybody think it's false? Okay, true it is. Yay. So
Shepard's is a citator. Validation checking is a legal research step you never want to skip. Here's why.
In this case, we have no newly discovered facts with respect to the motion for reconsideration of Laura McKinney.
But doesn't the case law dealing with that particular code section include criminal cases? If you Shepardize that, you come up with some criminal cases.
We did. I believe that none were found, Your Honor. We don't have any in our motion, which leads me to believe that no, there aren't any criminal cases under that section. And you asked me that question because you knew Ms. Lewis wrote the motion, huh?
You love how she threw under the bus.
No, as far as I know, there are no criminal law cases that involve that section because it's not recognized in criminal law. So, I mean, at least in theory, we didn't have to have all the argument. But
So if my Pepperdine law clerks found some.
did they? Criminal cases? And what do they say?
Say it's applicable to criminal law cases.
Okay. Nevertheless, we don't have any newly
Now that you've seen why you should always validate your research, let's look at how to do it effectively. In the Thompson drug and theft prosecution, it's not in dispute that Mr. Thompson took the beekeeper suit from the person of the apiary owner. But a question has arisen in your research about the nature of Mr. Thompson's taking that will affect his sentencing if convicted. Specifically, should the taking of the beekeeper suit be considered a violent felony, requiring the classification of a crime to be included in the charging papers for sentencing? The district attorney was not aware of any such ruling in the Second Circuit. He referred you to a case from the Seventh Circuit he is familiar with on this topic, United States v. Lee. He wants you to use this case to find a similar ruling in the Second Circuit. Lee's two principal holdings say that theft from a person is not a violent felony and that the classification of a crime must be included in the charging papers. When you pull the case up, you notice it has a red stop sign next to the case name. This warning symbol indicates that Lee is no longer good law for at least one point of law discussed in the case.
Okay, so at this point, you would want to go and take a look at Shepard's report. So if you've got your computers, and you should see Lex's Advanced scrolling down. Sometimes this doesn't come up for me, but today it is. So we want to find out the Shepard's report for US v. Lee. How many cases have questioned a ruling? So we would want to go to, so actually we don't even have to. So how many cases have questioned?
3.
3. And we see that here, right? Everybody see that? Okay.
It doesn't mean that your case is bad law and therefore uncitable, but it does mean you'll want to be very careful with your use of this case. These signals do not evaluate the validity of an entire case. Instead, they attach to points of law in a case and alert you to the way subsequent decisions have analyzed those points of law. In short,
Okay, that is like the critical part of this. Signal doesn't say the entire case is invalid. It analyzes different parts, points of law, holdings of the case.
You don't validate cases to determine if they are good law. You validate holdings from cases to make sure they are still citable authority.
So hopefully this is super straightforward. You can determine the validity of a case by viewing this signal attached to it. How many think it's true? False? Raise hands. Few who are abstaining, but mostly false. Yeah, absolutely. Again, that's probably the critical part of this the most critical part of this module is to understand that you are validating holdings, not the entire case. And sometimes cases can be invalid for one holding, but valid for another.
Remember, there are 2 holdings from the Lee case you are researching. Holding number 1, theft from a person is not a violent felony. Holding number 2, classification of a crime must be included in the charging papers. Validating Lee takes you to a Shepard's report with separate sections for appellate history, citing decisions, other citing sources, and table of authorities. When determining if a holding is still valid, you will need to review the appellate history and citing decisions sections of a Shepard's report. There is no appellate history for Lee, but it's important for you to see how the appellate history works. So let's take a quick look at an unrelated case with a straightforward history. Worldwide Volkswagen. The appellate history contains the Supreme Court of Oklahoma decision that was appealed to the Supreme Court of the United States. The second case listed is the Supreme Court of the United States decision that reversed the Oklahoma decision. This is your case, Worldwide Volkswagen. What follows are the subsequent decisions that could affect the holdings in Worldwide Volkswagen. When you're using Shepard's to determine if a holding from your case is still valid authority, these subsequent decisions are the most important cases for your review.
Okay, so which are the most important decisions from a case's appellate history? Anybody go for prior decisions?
Subsequent.
Subsequent, we're all for subsequent. It's what she just said. So again, these are the...
Another way to review a case's history is using the appellate history map. The appellate history map is a visual representation of a case's path through the courts. The legend menu explains the graphics used in the map.
So this is like the map I showed you on...
Clicking the links in the map provides you a quick look at the case information.
So according to the appellate history map, where did the later proceedings take place in Worldwide Volkswagen? So where are the later proceedings? So let's copy that. And so I'm going to the case. So here's Worldwide Volkswagen, and if I Shepardize that, so we want to look at the appellate history and we want to know where the later proceedings. And it's where did the later proceedings take place?
Intermediate court.
Looks like the Federal Intermediate Court. Absolutely, 10th Circuit.
Now let's continue your analysis of the holdings from the Lee case by looking at the decisions from the other courts that have analyzed the Lee case under the Citings Decision section of the Shepard's report. You notice that the red stop sign appears next to the link for citing decisions. This tells you that the negative analysis for the holdings from your case can be found in this section of the Shepard's report. First, let's narrow this report to the cases analyzing holding number 1 from Lee. Theft is not a violent felony. Using the Search Within Results filter, you can quickly search the citing decisions for mentions of violent felony.
So what they just showed is what I was showing you earlier. If you want to pinpoint your holding and how your holding was treated in later cases, you would use that Search Within Results. So let's see, they are asking, using the analysis filters to determine which these decisions analyzing mentions violent felony and questions Lee. So actually first, I think I should be able to get back to Lee. So what I'm going to do is go to Lee, United States v. Lee. And shepherdize. And now I'm in the citing decisions already. So I am going to scroll down to search within results. So the question here, which of these decision Lee mentions violent felony? So Martin, Davis, Smith, or Taylor? So which one do we see? Actually, we see both. Huh. Which of these decisions? It looks like, oh, so we have to be more precise. See, we need to know which one questions. So now that I've done my search within results, I now can see which one questioned. So did you follow that? You're all going to get to do this on your own, if you haven't already, of course.
To check the validity of a Lee holding regarding theft, you need to review the cases that analyze Lee negatively. Under Analysis on the left, you can see there are 2 cases overruling a holding from Lee, 2 cases distinguishing themselves from a holding in Lee, and 1 case criticizing a holding from Lee. In all, you have 4 cases to review because 1 case both distinguishes and criticizes Lee. Click the warning link to see the case overruling a holding from Lee.
Okay, so use the analysis to find the case that mentions and criticizes. We just did that, right? So use the analysis filters to find a case that mentions violent and criticizes. So I thought we just did that. All right, so let's clear the analysis. Oh, we want criticizes. So here we've searched violent felony, and here's criticized. So that would be, so you're all following?
You can see that United States v. House both overrules a holding from Lee and follows a holding from Lee. Click the link for the House case and scroll through the case using the references arrow. You can see in this paragraph that House overrules the Lee holding that theft from a person is not a violent felony. But House follows Lee's holding regarding charging papers, even going so far as to say that Lee's holding regarding charging papers remains good law. So the case from the Seventh Circuit that the district attorney referred you to has been overruled by United States v. House for a holding important to your analysis, specifically that theft from a person should be considered a violent felony. You'll still need to read the cases that distinguish and criticize Lee's holdings if they're from the Second Circuit to be sure. But it appears that based on relevant case law, Mr. Thompson's theft of the beekeeper suit should be considered a violent felony, and that classification must be included in the charging papers to preserve it for sentencing.
Okay, so now we would follow the same process and we would want to distinguish, figure out which one distinguished. So I'm going to pick a random one. So if you went, if you saw what distinguished and looked at the discussion meter.
Now you need to find a similar case from the Second Circuit because United States v. House is not binding in your jurisdiction. The good news is that you can use the House case to look for similar cases from the Second Circuit. In the Finding More Authority from a Case module, you'll learn how to do just that with Shepard's using the citations grid, headnotes, and the table of authorities,
which I showed you earlier. Okay, so that's it. I am gonna ask, I know you've seen through it, watched it now, but I'm gonna ask you to go through the module on your own and complete it. I get a record of it on the Lexis Learn once you've done it. I think it'll be valuable for you to actually have to click through and do it on your own. Okay. Does anybody want to stick around for questions on the case finding workshop, or do you want to do that on your own another time? So why don't we do this? Why don't we say that's it for tonight. If you decide you have questions, you can email me. If it turns out to be worthwhile, I can even set up a Zoom session with you to go over something individually. So you just let me know. I will see you all next week. Keep in touch if you have questions, and stay safe and be well. See you next week.
Thank you.
Jenny, I'm here. Just come on by. Okay, I am going to end the meeting and recording now.